This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, producing.
Quite a long, there's a little stretch in there, aren't there?
Welcome to the American Theater Wing Seminars on Working in the Theater. These seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located in the very heart of the theater, where Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway all meet to create that special magic that is live theater. The American Theater Wing created the Tony Awards, and it is known for that, but it has an all-year-round program that is behind these prestigious awards. It was started in the First World War and continued during the Second World War. It is, in fact, the oldest ongoing organization, nonprofit, devoted to the community and serving the community through the theater. Our program is varied one. We send shows to hospitals, live, professional theater. This was started a long time ago, and it continues today. We support a program called Saturday Theater for Children, which indeed is an extraordinarily wonderful program. Children line up on Saturday mornings. They commit themselves to buying a ticket, but no child is ever turned away, and seeing a show in their own school. This is a habit that we hope will last them through a lifetime, so that they will go to the theater as a matter of course, as a need to see live theater, not just for the big occasion of an anniversary or a birthday, because theater is important to them. And then these seminars, they come out of a program for returning veterans. They came back to a school founded by the American Theater Wing so they could relearn their trade and then take it out to the schools and the hospitals and share it with each other. And so the seminars that we are doing here are based on that very same principle. We have a seminar on the performance and the one on play script director. Today's seminar is on the production. That brings the whole together, of how it came about. And it truly is a wonderful, wonderful panel that we have. I'm going to turn this over to our co-moderators right now, and that is Jean Dalrymple, who is a member of the board of directors of the American Theater Wing, an actress, a playwright, a director, and an author. And Ed Wilson, who is critic for the Wall Street Journal and director of the Center for Advanced Studies in Theater Arts. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theater Wing, and I welcome you here this morning.
Thank you, Isabel. I'd like to begin by introducing the gentleman on my far right here. He is responsible for the advertising campaign of the Broadway production of M. Butterfly. He's been doing this for a number of years. He is the director of theatrical advertising for Gray Entertainment and Media. Among many other distinctions, he is the gentleman who started the idea of theatrical live-action advertising on television with the production of Pippin. If you all remember that campaign, it was a work of art in itself, actually, that television ad. Mr. Jeffrey Ashe. Next to him is the general manager for the Broadway production of M. Butterfly. He's a partner of Joseph Harris Associates. He's the general manager for Breaking the Code, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Sophisticated Ladies, Jackie Mason's World According to Me, a list that goes on and on and on. I'll stop right there and simply give his name, Steve Goldstein.
And I'm very happy to introduce my old friend and colleague, who is the press agent of the whole United States, if not the world. And we're both charter members of the Guild of Press Agents, and that's John Springer. And next to him is one of the most important people in show business. He's a stage manager, production stage manager, and none of us as producers or anything else in the theater could exist without his work. And he has been the production stage manager for so many wonderful things. Of course, he's now doing it for Monsieur Butterfly, but he's also been with Equus, Amadeus, Coco, Seesaw, Carmen, which was a very unusual show at the Lincoln Center, and must have been really quite a job to do that one. And he's also been, and this is very important to us at the American Theater Wing, he's been the general production manager for the Tonys for the last 5 years. And his name is Bob Borod. And then right next to me is a very old friend of mine, and he's the producer of Monsieur Butterfly. And he has done wonderful shows that we've all loved. I remember 1776 with such affection, and Pippin, of course, which we've also just mentioned. And his name is Stuart Ostrow. And I'm going to begin this whole procedure by asking you, how did you first decide to do Monsieur Butterfly?
It came about as a result of my new relationship with David Wong. We were working on a project with Philip Glass. Indeed, it's still in the making. It was a concept that I had given to Hal Prince, who agreed to direct, based on La Condition Humaine, the Malraux, Man's Fate. We ran into nothing but joy with each other about the collaboration. Philip had recommended that David Wong write the adaptation, and naturally I wanted to know more about David, so I read all of his plays. And reading plays sometimes is a very, very important test of a playwright, and it flew off the page. Suddenly I found a playwright who really was literate and had some mysticism, and I said, well, this great, great man. I found out he was 29 years old, and I was sure he was a great man at that point. And we ran into negotiating difficulties for the rights, because Andre Malraux, I'm convinced Andre Malraux is still alive in some underground atelier conducting negotiations through the French publisher Gallimard. And for those of you who have seen the show, I named the character Gallimard in our play, in affectionate tribute to the publisher who has held us up. Nevertheless, the negotiations bogged down. Philip had things to do. Hal did Phantom of the Opera. And David and I were left with this regard for each other. And we both said, let's do something together. And I said, yes, I want to do something like some new musical, which I feel good about, and I think you can write for the musical theater. He said, fine. And we, I think, simultaneously found this item in the newspapers, in the New York Times, about the story of the play. And David said, God, that's a wonderful subject. Let's do that. And I think I can write a musical about that. I said, fine, and I commissioned him to write it. And we did the research on it. And we decided only to use those events that were reported in the international newspaper, and David would then take off from there as a playwright to invent the story. And halfway through it, he called me. He was in France, and he said, Stuart, I'm sorry, it's not a musical, it's a play. And I said, oh. I said, I don't want to do a play. And he said, well, read it. I said, okay. And it's a long-winded answer, but I read the play, and I was entranced by it. And like anything else that I've ever done in the theater, I had to do it. I mean, that's what theater's all about. I just had to do it.
That's the only way to do theater today, you know, when you have to do it, because it's so darn difficult and so expensive that unless you fall in love and want to get married to it, you know, you just don't do it.
I think one of the fascinating things about this opening that you've told, what you've just told us, is the fact that there is this real collaboration between a producer and a writer. I don't think that happens as often today as perhaps it happened many years ago. Is that your feeling?
That's my feeling. But, you know, I was brought up believing. I was Frank Less's apprentice, so I was brought up in that writer worship era. I mean, to me, a producer is a fellow who knows a writer, really. And the word is always the most important thing. And if you follow that dictum, then you will wind up with somebody who's willing to trust you. And that's where the word collaboration comes in.
Look, just since we're on this phase of it, when he sent you the script and you were really entranced with the script, did you then make some suggestions, give some reactions?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And which he took, so there really was a real give and take between producer and writer, even in that early stage of it.
That's when I knew we were going to be lucky, because it just worked. Collaboration to me is when somebody else has a better idea.
Yeah.
And that is what happened.
Yes.
And it was, and the same way with John Dexter. It worked that way because
the director, we should.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm sorry, John Dexter, who directed it. It became a real love affair between the three of us because we just kept on looking for each other to top each other and make it better.
At what point did you bring John Dexter into the picture?
After I thought that we had a completed first draft, which took about a year of rewriting. By the way, I will say that one of the things that's remarkable about David is that David rewrites. I think we live in a first draft society where nobody will do any rewriting, including political candidates and everybody. But that is what made it work.
Because if you look at the record of plays that have been successful, in many cases, the rewrites have been as important as the original scripts.
Absolutely.
Well, of course, in the old days, the producer and the writer always got together, as I remember it, and the producers knew exactly what they wanted. And when you finally got the director, then the three would get together and work on the script. And when they went into rehearsal, that script was pretty nearly perfect, and they had very little rewriting to do. But those days are past because
not with this play. That's precisely what happened.
That's what I mean.
That was wonderful.
You're a real producer of the old kind, you say. But today, most of the producers we have, I think, are money raisers. They're not the way you and Bob Whitehead and people like that, the old good producers are. It's a shame because it saves a lot of work and heartache.
I just had a dream come true, I got to tell you. For the first time I've ever been linked with Bob Whitehead, and he's, he's one of my heroes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Well, I think it's very appropriate in this case because clearly we certainly want to get to all these other gentlemen and where they came into the picture, but just one crucial thing, it seems to me, and one very courageous thing, as well as this relationship you had with the writer, which was so important, and I hope we can come back to that maybe a little later. But your decision, which is quite unusual in today's producing world, to go straight for Broadway with you were in Washington, is that where the tryout was? And that was rather than try to have it done perhaps in a regional theater, which most, I'd say 90% now of the plays on Broadway have probably gone through the route of a non-profit theater tryout.
Yes. You
went straight for Broadway. You went for all the marbles here.
Yes.
At what point did you decide to do that, or was that in your mind from the beginning?
From the beginning.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that there's no place like Broadway to have a shot fired around the world if you do it right. And the regional theater seems to me to be an appendage for producers to make a decision about something that they should have made a decision about before they began. They're using this workshop principle and this regional theater principle, I think, with too few exceptions, as a way of delivering a work that has not yet been realized, and of saving money, which which seems to me to be the wrong thing to do.
We're going to get to the money part,
Yeah.
and I think we better get there fast because we're already in Washington, and we don't know how you got to Washington. So where do you want to start on that? Jean?
Well, I think we don't have to ask about the money because Mr. Ostrow has always had wonderful sources, and including his own, which is very helpful. And that's also unusual today in the theater. How did you start? Oh, you said you commissioned the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you assemble the cast that we have on the stage today? At what
It took
point?
us about 8 months to cast the show. Long time.
At what
When did
point?
each one? Oh,
I was just so we do get the sort of scenario in terms of the people who are with us today, because I think it'll be interesting to go back and talk about the decision to go to Washington and then all the subsequent steps. But just for our information, in roughly what order did you bring in the gentlemen who are with us now in terms of general manager, production stage manager, advertising, and publicity?
Well,
Do
with
you
the
remember?
exception of Bob Borod, who is a new collaborator and a joy, I have had a working relationship with John Springer and Jeffrey Ash and Steve Goldstein for many, many years. They've done all of my shows. So
this is an old
we've had a
team.
team. We've
that's
had a
back
team.
together again.
Yeah.
And I've just been waiting for something that I had to do. And I was fortunate enough to be able to call on this team, and they delivered as they usually did, except better.
Yeah.
How did you, and who was involved in the decision to use, since you had decided to go to Broadway with one tryout, essentially, which was the National Theater in Washington?
Correct.
How did you decide on Washington as opposed to Boston, New Haven, whatever?
Well, the subject of the play, you know, and I'm assuming that all of you have seen the play.
Maybe we should,
You know,
maybe
I have no
I think
idea.
you have to back up because I don't think
you-
everybody has seen it. So you have to back up a bit.
And yes, because that story that you referred to that was in the New York Times, which is the basis for the play, the point of departure, we really should say, for the play. Maybe you should give us just a little précis here.
I would love to hear you do it.
I've already done it.
I know. I just wanted to hear it again. It's a piece about, it's a true story, based on a true story, about a French diplomat who was accused and sentenced for passing state secrets to a Chinese opera star. And this liaison had been going on for 20 years. It started in Beijing and ultimately was uncovered in Paris when he was still in the Foreign Service. And to everyone's astonishment, including the diplomat, it was revealed at the trial that the Chinese opera star was not only a spy, but a man. He claimed not to have known that. And that is what the play is about. The play is about a lot of, it's not only about that prurient point, it's also about Orientalism, which is the most pernicious form of racism around today. It's about feminism. It's about sexism. It's about many, many, many subjects. And it was David's genius to be able to find the metaphor for all of this in the icon of Puccini's opera, Madame Butterfly.
Did the subject matter have then something to do with your deciding to go to Washington to come
Yes,
back to the
because
point we had?
it seemed to me that it was an international play. It was a play that dealt with an international subject. And indeed, if this role continues, and I'm hopeful that it will, I will produce versions of this in London and in Paris and in Tokyo. And indeed, there have been already offers from those places.
It is really a most theatrical kind of play. It's wonderful. And I'd like to know each one's role of where they started, where they came in, and so that we can say...
It starts with Steve Goldstein as the general manager, who has the task of looking at me and saying, "You really want to do this?"
That's exactly, okay. All right, Steve, did you really say that?
Actually, no. This was a play that Stu passed along the first draft, and I took it home, and I mean, I couldn't wait to turn the pages. I mean, this play really did just jump out at you, and came in the next morning and said, "Let's do it. This is really good theater. This is great
You
stuff."
said, "Let's do it."
Yeah. I was very excited about doing it. I wasn't quite sure how we were going to put the whole production together. It's a huge undertaking, and I of course gave Stu all the warnings that you give any producer who wants to go and do a straight play in today's marketplace. Well, you got to have your head examined. A play today, a serious drama today, is we're in an economy where it's the market is desperate. It's very difficult to get a straight play on and make it work and get your money back. And so, along with any straight play come the warnings about you really want to do this. You realize what's involved. But I've done 4 shows now with Stuart, and my partner Joe Harris has been with Stu since the beginning.
Who figured out the budget for this show?
That's the first thing that I do.
You figured out the budget.
Read the script, ask Stu some fundamental questions, and then I go about writing a budget. I bring it back to Stuart, and we go over it line by line and discuss. Now, is this really what you had in mind here? I'm allowing for 4 understudies. You think that's going to do it, or do I figured out that we're going to cover it this way, and Stu says no. The 2 women are too far apart in age, so we're going to have 5 understudies, and we go back and forth and hammer out a budget from there.
That's a crucial meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
And he does it superbly.
What budget did you come up with?
We ended up with a budget. We capitalized the show at $1.5 million.
Which, of course, is a lot for a straight
It's
play.
a lot of money.
Yes.
Of course, there are a lot of costumes. There's a very elaborate set. And then how much did you allow for the Washington tryout? Because you had to assume that was not, that was going to be risky, as well as the whole venture being risky.
That's one of the crazy things about the way we do budgets. I've worked for other general managers and now I've become a general manager myself. And the fact of the matter is, we don't budget for losses out of town. It makes no sense.
No.
It makes no sense whatsoever. You've really got to recognize the possibility of losing money out of town. But the fact of the matter is that if you tried to budget, if you put in the kind of number that would be required to cover your out-of-town losses, you'd never raise the money to do the play. Because the investors would say, well, obviously you have no faith in the project. Look at all this money that you assume we're going to lose out of town.
So you mean this is not a function of reality, then? This is a function of
well, what happens
money,
is,
then?
yes, it's a function of raising money. What happens is we budget a play, we add a reserve, typically 15 to 20% reserve, above and beyond the original, the hard numbers on the budget, and we say that reserve is for cost overruns on the production side, or losses out of town, or preview losses in New York, and then we say, let's go ahead and do it. And really, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We should be budgeting for out-of-town losses. But investors would look at that and say, you don't believe in this.
You do have, then, some reserve.
There is a reserve in any
in this
budget,
case was
yeah.
what, 15, 20%, was it?
It was just over
150,000.
Yeah, it was
15%. 10%.
No, that's 10%.
10% you had to
Plus the
cover.
bonds make it 15%.
No, you're right. It is 15% with bonds.
With
Yes.
bonds make it 15%.
Now, Jeff, when did you come into
Probably
the
about the same time
Did
as
you read
Steve
the script, too?
Yes, Stuart
What-
gave me
what was your
first
reaction
draft.
to the
Well, not to be repetitive, but it was the same as Steve's. I couldn't put it down, and as I turned each page, I was dying to see what happened next. I think the fascinating thing about this play is that it works on so many levels, and it's about so many things. As Stuart was saying, the male, female, politically, racism. It's a fascinating play and quite a challenge to advertise and to find a piece of art for. When Stuart gave me the script, one of the first things that I have to do is to try and find a piece of art that will then represent that play.
Sort of like a logo, or
yes, exactly, a logo, or a more elaborate piece of art, or that was art.
Now, do you commission? How do you go about trying to identify that and trying to get that, have that created?
Comes after a lot of years of experience and doing it and knowing.
Do you do that, or do you ask artists to do that?
I ask artists to do it. I think one thing Stuart brought up is that this business works only, in my opinion, as a collaborative affair, and we've known each other and worked together for a long time. And but yes, I read the play and knew artists that I thought would be appropriate and do a good job. We did about 40 pieces of art, 40 to 50 pieces of art. We did.
Trying to find the right thing.
And did quite elaborate pieces of art, and many of them tried to show certain parts of the play. And we came to the realization that rather than to do that, it would be better to find a logo that would represent the show and that people would bring their own connotations to.
So you really came up with the letter M and then with a butterfly.
Right.
Which is very simple, but also very arresting.
We found that after we had done about 30 or 40 other pieces. But we knew right away that it answered a lot of what we wanted to do. And it had colors from the show, and it also had the same feel in the hard edges of the M and the masculine, feminine, and the butterfly. And we decided to use a hologram as the butterfly, which is the first time that's ever been done in a poster.
Why don't you explain what a hologram is, just in case?
Well, I'm not sure I can do that, but it's a
camera
type
go
of
under
paper, and depending on how the light hits it, the color changes. It's like we have
shimmers. It has an almost three-dimensional quality.
It does.
To it,
it's like we have on our MasterCards or Visa cards.
Right, that thing. Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah. I think that John Springer probably came in at this point, didn't he?
Yes.
Didn't he also
it's a collaborative effort,
Yes,
and
I should think so.
I think one of the questions, because I think that this is a point for John to come in, that people are sometimes confused about, is what the two different functions are of the press representative, the press agent, and the advertising, because they have separate functions, and yet they obviously are working for the same goal. So, John, maybe you could tell us.
Well, the press agent is the person who tries to get the best attention in the media to the project, to do everything possible to get the name of the play and the things in the newspapers, on TV, wherever there is media. Now, I think we've done, if I may say so, a great press campaign on this, but any press agent, it isn't because we are good press agents, but you can only be as good as the project you're handling. This happens to be an absolute joy on which to work. Everything about it, right from the beginning. I've worked with Stuart many times. The joy of working with Stuart, too, is always that he takes a very exciting, unconventional project. Stuart never does the safe, conservative, easy kind of play. He always does something that really could be far out. This works. I've worked with John Dexter before. I handled Equus. The combination of those two to begin with. I had never known David Wang until I read his play. And then, as the others have said, it's just, you go, wow. And then you start figuring out how you're going to, it wasn't cast then, so you couldn't say, well, you got John Lithgow, and but you began to realize this play is going to get attention on its own, no matter who plays it. Fortunately, John Lithgow and Brad Wong are the ideal casting, but it could have been someone else. You didn't base your publicity campaign on the stars, as is the truth. Sometimes you base it on stars, not here. You base it on everything, but the excitement of the play. I remember talking to Jeremy Gerard, I think our first major publicity break.
A writer for the New York Times.
Yes. I had called Jeremy to tell him that Stuart was, because Stuart had been, he only comes out when he's got something terribly exciting. He doesn't just produce something for the sake of producing it. I said, he's got a show, it's terribly exciting and very involved, and he said, and I think it deserves maybe more than just a nice announcement in Enid Nemi's column. And Jeremy said, well, obviously it'll have to go to Enid first. And it did, and Enid wrote a nice announcement piece.
This is in the Friday New York Times.
Yeah, that's right,
general
yes.
announcements about
Exactly.
things that are coming up.
It's a column.
Then Jeremy, though, said, I promise that we'll do something special eventually. We've got to give the announcement to Enid. The next thing I knew, I was hoping that Jeremy might even do a Sunday arts and leisure piece, which would have been marvelous. Instead, it's the Sunday New York Times Magazine. Now, you can't get a better first publicity break than that. And everyone, that got enormous excitement and attention, and everything developed from that. There have been 3 major stories in the Times since then, and hopefully there'll be more. But and the news and the Post and the TV, and we have. But as I say, it's only because we have a project. We have a marvelous play, a play that has grasped people's imaginations, not just the press, the audiences. From the very first performance in Washington all the way through, before the critics had given them permission, the audience was jumping to their feet at the end of the show, every performance. And it's a joy. Yeah, it's easy to, it's easy and pleasant to do.
See why we get all the press?
I was going to say that. Now we know why he's such a good press agent. You really are. Let's go to the next step then. Where do you come in?
Well, I was lucky enough to get involved in this project because I've done a few shows that John Dexter, the director, directed. And therefore I think, now I'm not sure, I think John asked Steve or the Joe Harris office if I might be available. And I met John, and John said, I have a treat for you. And he said, read this. And I read it, and I'll tell you, I haven't read anything like it since Equus, actually.
Yeah.
And I couldn't wait for it to begin. And it was postponed a couple of months, and I thought, well, I can't wait for this. And of course it began, and it was just as I expected it would be. It's been a joy from the first rehearsal right to now to hear the audience each night jump to their feet and scream bravo, and to work with the most incredible actors.
Well, you're the one who works most closely with the director and the actors, obviously.
Exactly.
You're there at every rehearsal.
Every rehearsal and every performance, of course.
What about rehearsals?
I want to ask before that, how did you have the great genius to get John Dexter as the director?
I really knew the minute I read the play that he should direct it because of my memory of Equus. I thought that was a seminal production, and the spareness and the kind of Brechtian staging that John really won't admit to, but is, coupled with his ability to do opera. I mean, John was the co-director of the Metropolitan Opera with James Levine, and did some remark. I mean, the dialogue of the Carmelites and Billy Budd and Lulu. I mean, so the combination was irresistible. And as you know, as I listen to this litany, it occurs to me that on all of the shows that I've been lucky enough to have hits on, it's always turned out this way. It's been silk right from the beginning. And I feel it here right now. So I would guess, to come back to your question, it was an inevitable choice. And he read it and called me back in 2 days. 2 days, mind you.
That's remarkable.
And he said, I'm yours.
Since we've moved to the director briefly, because one of the stunning things about this production is the visual effect. The scenery and the costumes and the lighting are most unusual and striking, I think. Whose decision was it to use a designer for costumes and sets, for example, who had never worked on Broadway before? Because that was a bold and, I think, important decision.
Well, I have to take the blame for that.
How did you happen to think of using a Japanese designer, Eiko Ishioka?
That, again, came out of the original collaboration on Man's Fate. She was recommended by Philip Glass to be the designer.
The composer,
yes,
Philip Glass.
Yes. And I went to see a film that she did for Paul Schrader called Mishima. And she had done the interior dreams of Mishima, for those of you who have seen it. And they were remarkable stage settings. And I said, well, who is this person? And then I met her, and I was enchanted by her ability to demonstrate what she wanted by drawing. And I thought that was the first good sign of a designer.
Yeah.
And because of the language problem, when she was able to draw, I was much happier that way. And so was she. So then the collaboration began.
And obviously she and John Dexter, the director, worked well together.
Yes, yes, they did. They did. There were bumps in the night, but they worked together.
Just give us, since you've described this whole thing as silk, why don't you maybe give us one bump along, I mean, in terms of stage space or look or what? Bob's about to say.
In terms of time.
Time?
Yeah. For example, the kimono that we use. It's a quite wonderful, beautiful piece. And
which kimono is this?
The wedding dress.
The wedding dress, yeah.
In order to put one of those on, it takes 20 minutes, 25 minutes, all of the wrapping and all of that. And Eiko couldn't understand why we didn't take the 25 minutes
to stop the show?
Stop the show while we wrapped the... and Velcro was a thing of horror to her. And she kept saying, well, you don't know, the Western mind doesn't understand. And we kept saying, but the show has to be 2.5 hours long, not 4. And that was one of the bumps that we had.
Well, that was
this brings up a question. Those kimonos were in fact built in Japan. And we started, let's see, we were going into rehearsal in January, and I believe we approved them the last week of August and asked Eiko to get started on them immediately so that we could have them at the beginning of January, for the beginning of rehearsal.
And this was in
number one, because John wanted to work with them as early as possible, but really because I knew that no matter how many times I wrote to her, and we communicated by fax back and forth, because the time difference between New York and Tokyo is 12 hours or 11 or 13, I can't keep track. And I kept writing, now they must be rigged for quick change. They must be rigged. And I knew that she did not understand what I meant by quick change. She was going to build traditional kimonos, and she had already gone into telling us that we would have to fly an expert over from Tokyo to teach the actors all the intricate parts of this kimono, and I knew we were talking about half an hour to get into one of these things. And so my thought was, let's get them here in January, and we'll send them down to a costume shop and tear them apart and rebuild them. And as it happened, as it ended up, they got here about 10 days before the first preview. We just barely, no matter what we did, We ran into problems with Japanese New Year. We ran into problems with... no matter what we did, they ended up getting here about 10 days before.
They are
but they are
absolutely
stunning to look at.
They're all embroidered, which would cost us $50,000 a costume to embroider them here.
I want to get back to that, but did you have any problem with unions? You were having these made in Japan.
Actually, no, there wasn't any problem with that. Of course, ACO had to join United Scenic Artists, which she had not been a member of.
And there was no problem in having her do that. What about cost? When you say $50,000, let's get into that part now. Did you go over budget? Did you stay within budget?
No, thanks to Steve, we stayed within budget. We had out-of-town losses, which were not included in the budget, and those I covered myself. And so we're within budget. And one day they'll pay me back.
I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it.
So you, in other words, you were prepared to step up and cover those yourself.
Somebody has to.
In terms of the investors, and so protecting them.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you a little bit, because the whole team must have been involved in this, because there were problems in Washington, weren't there? I mean, it was
a phenomenon, not unlike New York, the power of one paper.
Yes.
We had 9 reviews, 8 of which were raves.
In Washington.
9 reviews, 8 of which were raves, and 1 which was a mixed review to a pan. But that was the Washington Post.
Yes.
And that paper is as influential as the New York Times is in New York. So the raves were wonderful solace for those people who came to see the show on the basis of that, because they could cheer on that basis. But it took us 2 to 3 weeks to get the word of mouth going, because the Washington audience stayed away. They were told by the critic of the Washington Post that this wasn't worth their time.
When that happens now, what does John do and what does Jeff do when you do get a notice in that one critical paper, despite the raves, that what you all must spring into action, if I may use the term?
Yes, of course you do. The fascinating thing about the Washington Post, too, is that Dick Cole, who is to the Washington Post what Walter Kerr is to the New York Times, he was the critic for years and years and years. He's left and he's now critic emeritus,
yeah.
Right. He loved the play. The second string critic, who would be comparable to the Mal Gusso, loved the play. Just Dave Richards, who happened to be the Frank Rich, had his problems and qualifications. Well, obviously, we did. And my son, Gary, who is my partner, and not nepotism just because he's that good, he was in Washington most of the time, and he was setting up. John Lithgow worked like a dog. We didn't expose Brad Wong yet. We kept him under wraps. John Dexter was terribly busy. Stuart was a little retiring. So really, it was primarily John Lithgow who did every conceivable TV show and every conceivable interview. And obviously, it got a lot of attention, and because of the attention, the audience started coming in. And the word of mouth, you can't discount, because it is the best word of mouth play I've ever known. Since Equus, which I handled with Bob, the word of mouth is phenomenal on this play.
Jeff, what about you in terms of Washington?
We had a meeting the morning after the show opened and went over all the reviews and saw that there were many other reviews that were wonderful and really said what we hoped would be said. So we had a radio spot that we had prepared in advance, and we went into the studio that morning and put in quotes from the other critics and bought quite a large schedule in Washington that went on right away that told people who had possibly had only seen the Washington Post that there were many other critics that loved this play.
Did you go ahead, excuse me.
And did you make up a big display ad of the quotes for the paper? And did you put them in the Post?
We did.
Good.
So, but you did then increase the advertising in order to overcome this one ad that was not
Yes,
all
did.
out, to say the least.
Right.
And so then, and obviously it worked. Bob,
Our business increased by 50% in the third week.
in Washington. How many weeks were you in Washington?
4.
4 weeks altogether.
4.5 weeks.
I want to ask Bob a question because he does work closely with the directors and the actors. And John Lithgow and Brad, as you call him, B.D. Wong, both have expressed the feeling that they like the theater they're in now better than the National.
Yes.
Could you speak to that just a little bit?
Well, sure. It's that the O'Neill is
Which is where it's playing now
where
in New
we're
York.
now here in New York, is a much smaller, intimate theater where, and with our set, I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't seen it, we're right out into the audience, and they have a communication and a feeling that the audience gives back to them that they didn't get really in Washington. Washington was rather vast.
I said it was because of the orchestra pit.
Well,
Because I think it's so difficult for an actor to get across that big
Exactly.
orchestra pit and communicate with
At the National Theater. in
Yeah, the
Washington.
National
In this
Theater,
case,
yes.
that
It's
wasn't
musical
really-
house, you know.
In this case, that wasn't really a problem because the set
know,
plays
they-
down
Plays in
into
the pit.
Yeah,
into the
but
pit.
it was still a
Yeah.
distance for them. They said themselves.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, though, that it's a rather typical situation. All the theaters out of town are much larger. The National is 1,672 seats. The O'Neill is just under 1,100.
Yes.
1078 less standing room.
Got to be accurate.
But that's a rather typical situation. All the road theaters are over 1,500 seats, and it's an economic one. It's much more expensive to have a play on the road, and therefore you need the additional capacity in the theater in order to make your nut.
Did you, when this situation came up in Washington, what were your concerns and problems at that point?
My concerns were, as they always are, how are we going to pay for this?
Yes.
When we went to Washington, we did so with the understanding that there was no subscription available to us. The Schuberts, at that point, had not offered a subscription series for the spring of '88, and if they had even if they had, it would not have been a substantial number of subscribers. All of the subscriptions across the country, all the subscription series, have really suffered in the last few years, particularly in the tryout towns, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington. It's an economic issue. Part of the problem is that the big blockbuster musicals are coming in and spending 6 months in a town. Well, you can't offer a subscription series if you're going to have one play there for 6 or 8 months. There's not enough time to book in other attractions. So all the subscriptions, with the exception of Baltimore, have really gone downhill in the last few years.
That's another serious shift then in the problems of producing, isn't
Yes.
it?
Did you try originally to go to Lincoln Center, the Eisenhower?
The Kennedy Center.
Kennedy Center.
We had a lot of discussions about the Eisenhower. In the end, the Eisenhower happens to be the one out-of-town theater that's 1,100 seats. Although it looks and feels like a much bigger house, it is in fact 1,130 seats, and we felt economically it wouldn't work.
Now, what a pity, because it has a sort of following, and it seems to me that every show that goes in there makes a profit.
I must tell you that I always had my eye on the National. It seemed to me to be the right kind of medicine ball to throw around before you came into a smaller theater in New York. The Eisenhower is an odd theater. I mean, I love the fact that you have a built-in cushion with that audience that comes to the Kennedy Center no matter what. I mean, they come to see the Kennedy Center.
Right.
The Schuberts were very helpful in being able to understand my passion about the National, because I had played there many, many times. Frankly, I thought it was a lucky theater for me. And chess was to go into the National Theater. So the Shuberts couldn't give us, they couldn't fulfill their promise to us. So we did decide to switch over to the Eisenhower. And Roger had already booked something.
Oh.
So, and then chess fell through, so we got back to the National.
What about choosing the Eugene O'Neill Theater in New York? What was involved in that choice? You're laughing or you're smiling. I don't know. What was involved in
There was a serious competition between the Shuberts and Jew Jamson, and Jew Jamson won. They
see.
just loved the play more. It's as simple as that. And it's nice to be loved.
When you say that they won in terms of that they made better terms for you in terms of this to make it attractive to you as a producer.
Can I ask, what are the inducements that a theater owner gives you?
Well, the first one is the one I've just mentioned, Isabel. They really care deeply about the play. And that, to me, is the most pervasive argument, because I know when push comes to shove, you're going to need their help. And if they love something to begin with, then they're going to help you. And believe me, there were tough times with this piece in Washington when I asked for their help, and they came through. And it was because they loved the play. I'll never forget Rocco saying, "Thank God I love this play." That's a very important ingredient. And
can we go back to casting, because John Lithgow said that he had auditioned for you. Were there other actors that you had?
Well, I insist upon auditioning everyone,
right.
Star and no star.
How did you cast it?
And John was as gracious as he always is. I find most of the big stars are gracious.
Yes.
They will audition. They have no problem with those.
Was he the first one?
No, he wasn't. We had looked many directions. We had seen many other people. I won't tell you who.
No, I'm not interested. Dexter and along.
We had one of the big items that we had in his budget was the per diems. I had to fly John Dexter in from London. I mean, it was like a shuttle. And John takes the Concorde.
I kept complaining because I realized no matter what I had in the budget under per diem, it wasn't going to be enough. And I kept complaining to Stu that he just seemed to refuse to hire anyone who lived in New York. We had a director who lived in London. We had our scenic and costume designer, we had to fly in from Tokyo. Our author,
Los Angeles.
Both Brad and John lived in Los Angeles, and Andy Phillips lived in London. So it was costing us $15,000 to $20,000 to have a production meeting. It was just impossible, and no matter what I did, Stu insisted on going ahead with it.
Had that been in your budget from the beginning, or did you
we
realize it?
We were over in that category. We were over, but we had sufficient cushions in other areas.
I was going to say, where did you perhaps have some savings that made up for that per diem?
Well, orchestrations for one.
Yes. Yeah.
We had over budgeted orchestrations at $30,000, and the orchestrations didn't exist.
Yes.
And we were able to use the majority of that.
Good.
I will mention that Meg Simon and Fran Kuhlman were remarkably attentive to the needs of this production. They are casting agents. And they're more than that. They're very, very sensitive people who don't just send you lists. They sit and talk with you and try to make you dig as much as you can as to what your inner thoughts are about the character. Because the best time, Gene will tell you, the best time in the creating a play is the casting. Because you begin to learn about the play by seeing the actor read. I mean, it would be a terrible mistake to have cast Robert De Niro in this part, as great as he is. It would have been a dreadful mistake. Yeah. So you begin to look for those characteristics that tell you more and inform you more about what the playwright had meant. And Fran and Meg were wonderful in that regard.
Is that the role of the casting agent now? It's pretty much, it's a new role. The casting agent has just come in. Yeah. And is that just what you described? Is that a quality that's necessary for a casting?
It is a new role. I remember having many casting directors who just simply gave you lists, and you would choose from your own experience of having gone to see theater. Now, I still do that, but now, because I guess there aren't very many people who are producing plays who go to see theater, they use these specialists to do their thinking for them. Well, unless you meet the intelligence of the people who are working for you, then you yourself are ineffective. I think I'm lucky to have had these people because they were way ahead of me on certain things that I had not seen and anticipated my own needs. And it was a good collaboration.
Bob, was the chemistry good in terms of once the cast was there, were they from the beginning in the rehearsal? How many weeks of rehearsal did you have?
Well, we had actually 4. We began the Peking opera segment 2 weeks actually before.
This is training
BD
Wong
Brad for the that incredible dance that he does, and we started then 2 weeks before, and then 4 weeks of rehearsal. It was the most incredible. The first day, we just knew that we had the chemistry, the proper chemistry. John Lithgow is an absolute prince. He is one of the most incredible actors and one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever worked with. And BD, a newcomer, is just willing to learn and to do. It's the most wonderful experience I've had in theater in a long, long time. Really.
And so there were no cast changes, obviously.
None at all.
You were happy then from.
It was well cast to begin with.
How many weeks or months did you spend in terms of this casting process?
8 months.
8 months. That's a long time to try to find.
So it was cast correctly, and when you cast correctly, then you have very few problems.
As part of that process, did you try to determine that the chemistry was right between various people, clearly the 2 leads? You must have had them together before you actually...
We did.
Yes.
We did. And it was right. And that ultimately was the crucial decision. I know I had decided in my own mind that John Lithgow should play the part only after I had seen him audition with Brad Wong. That's what confirmed it.
So the combination is really what...
That's
of course,
what I
it's so crucial to this play, the way they play together.
You had to believe that love story. You had to believe that the actor believed he was in love with a man. That was the most important thing. Whether you believed that that man was a man or a woman was inconsequential. I think you wrote something about that.
Did I?
Yes. We've all had a wonderful time here now, loving each other, but you're not going to get away with just that, because we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to be questions from the audience and questions from all of us on cost. And we want to know about the costs that you've allocated for. It doesn't have to be monies, but it can be percentages on what you've allocated for the media, what you've allocated for TV. Have you done a television spot? Are you going to do one? And also that very, very nibbling question that keeps, nagging question that keeps coming up. Why is the ticket price so high? And is there anything that we can do about it? So please take your break now. Don't go too far away and come back armed with questions.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
continuing the American Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater. These seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. This seminar is on the production. Everything that you need to know, I hope, will be answered on what it takes to do a show from option to opening. And the cast today is a production team of M. Butterfly, a wonderful play that's on Broadway right now. So without any further ado, we're going to go back to Jean Dalrymple and Ed Wilson, our co-moderators, who will question this wonderful panel of intelligence and information. How about that?
Just before we go to the questions from the audience, which we want to get to as quickly as we can, Steve, maybe you could tell us, as the general manager, just broadly what the categories of costs were in terms of the budget, what money goes for in terms of the acting, rehearsals, set, costume, if you can. I mean, I know you don't have any sheets with you, but
right.
in broad terms.
In broad terms, there are really, I believe, six major categories in the budget. The first category is physical production. That's the costs of scenery, costumes, lighting and sound rental, and any special effects you might have. And on this production, it ran about 20% of the budget.
Which would be $300,000.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The next area is what we call fees and non-refundable advances, which are the fees paid to director, author, in this case a musical director. In the case of a musical, they would have included a choreographer. Basically, the creative elements of the production. And that ran a little over 10, not quite 10% of the budget.
Yeah.
The third area would be rehearsal costs, which would include salaries for actors, stage managers, company manager, press agent, company crew, who are the stage hands that are on the show payroll. Also, wardrobe, rehearsal musicians. That category runs again close to 20% of the production cost. The next area is advertising and publicity, which is pretty obvious. That's the best part. Advertising publicity is the cost of creating your image, and also placement, newspaper, radio, television, outdoor advertising, and I guess those are the major areas, and magazines. And that figure runs to, again, 20 to 25% of the budget.
You don't have much left.
The last category is all other.
I see.
And you tell me what I've left, what I've gotten, what's left.
I think you've covered it very well.
All right.
And, in terms of, do you have to make shifts as it goes along among those categories as one thing? I mean, you need more.
Well,
advertising.
inevitably you do. You always you write a budget, and you use the best information that you have at the time. At the time that the first budget was done for the show, as I mentioned earlier, Stu hadn't told me that he wasn't going to hire anybody who lived in New York. So
I forgot, we left out the choreographer from Beijing.
So as time goes along, there are inevitably shifts made in the budget. I've been on other shows where they've decided to increase the the capitalization as more information becomes available as to what things are going to cost. More often you shift within the.
How did you all decide on what the ticket prices would be, the top price, and how you would scale it? Is this completely? I mean, do you do this in conjunction with the theater, or how do you decide?
Well, yes, you do it in conjunction with the theater. You inevitably look around at what other plays or musicals are charging at the time, and you look at your capacity and also what your costs are. I have to admit that what other shows are charging, there's a very small range between all the straight plays on Broadway.
Yes.
You pretty much charge the going rate, what the other shows are doing.
Isabel?
Could I ask, while you're talking about theater tickets, could you possibly go back? Could you reduce the price of a ticket even though competitive prices are up that high?
Well, in fact, we do reduce the price of the ticket, but not the full ticket box office price. With the way we offer a number of discounts. There are a number of other ways to buy tickets for considerably less money.
How?
And there is the TKTS booth, which is we get half price for those tickets. There's an additional service charge that the patron pays, but we get half price for it. There's Theater Development Fund, which offers a severe discount. Their ticket price, again, we get I believe we get $8, and I believe they charge $9.50.
Those go to very special groups.
Those go to very special groups. Yes.
Groups who wouldn't be coming otherwise. We should hasten to say, really, and it gives them an opportunity to come.
Wonderful audience, by
Yes,
the way.
they are.
Wonderful, intelligent, alert audience.
Yeah, they're real theater goers. And
yes,
it's great to have them. But there are, and eventually on this play, as we go further down in the run, I'm sure that we'll do twofers, which have a. There aren't any twofers today that are actually 2 for 1.
Do you have a balcony?
An adjusted price.
Pardon?
Do you have a balcony?
Yes, mezzanine.
Is it less still? Is your ticket price reduced?
Yes, down to $27.
What's your top price?
$40.
Which is lower than the top musical price by a good deal.
Quite so.
It's a straight
quite
play.
20% lower than the top of the top musical.
It's still a lot of money.
No doubt about it.
Well, I know you want to get into this, Isabel. I don't think it's a lot of money.
Well, I think the only reason we can't get into it is it would take two entire panels to really get into the whole subject, because it is such a. I think everybody feels that they wish prices could be reduced, and it's a historical matter for one thing, and you don't have a lot of choice as you come into the picture of what you're going to do, except I think it is important to say that when you look at the total picture of the theater-going public, that with the TKTS booth, the half-price booth, which is a day of, you have to purchase it the day you're going to the theater, and the other, the group sales, that there are opportunities, that it's not just strictly the one price, even though you have to have an educated or public, but people who really want to go to the theater and care about it. And as you say, they frequently make the best audiences.
Oh, wonderful, just wonderful.
Because they really care about going to the theater. But it is the regrettable thing is that for the person who doesn't know about those special situations, that there's not something between the top price and the half price, shall we say?
That has always been a mystery to me. I mean, I served on the only comparative dilemma that I can think of is that I served on the National Endowment for 5 years, and we had $160 million to give out, and we had to find people to award the money to who didn't know that the money was available. It's the same principle as the theater.
Yeah.
Why don't they know that these half-price tickets are available? There should be organizations screaming that, and somehow it doesn't get down to the public, and it's a great mystery to me.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have a lot more questions other than the ticket price, and so we're going to turn this section over to questions from the audience. So would you come right up and address your question to the person you want to answer.
My question is to Mr. Ostrow. I'd like to know how you seduce your silent partners, the investors, in a straight show versus a musical. Is it a matter of the potential financial reward or the sense of adventure or a combination of both?
One, by having previous hit shows. That's the most important result that they want. They look at their record of investment with me, and if they come out having been a winner, they will gamble with me ever more. Does that answer?
Yeah.
So it's a track record, you're saying, pretty much.
In my case, I've been fortunate, I guess.
My name is Cynthia Lopez. My question is directed to Mr. Ostrow. How did you produce your first project?
Poorly. I was working for Frank Lesser, and we had just done How to Succeed in Business, and I found a musical called We Take the Town, which I wanted to bring to the company, because we had begun a small subsidiary company called Frank Productions. The name of the company was Frank Music Company. And Frank said, "No, Stuart, it's really not for us." And I said, "I've got to do it. It's a wonderful..." It was a musical about Pancho Villa, and it starred Robert Preston. This was right after The Music Man, and he was wonderful. But because I was 27 years old and a novice, and because Preston said, "I'll do the show with you, kid, but you got to go into rehearsal in January," I said, "Okay," and I raised the money. Thank God for Goddard Lieberson, who believed in me, in Columbia Records, and I hired my 11th choice of director, because I couldn't get the first 10, because I had to meet this obligation. And that was my failing, because by not choosing the correct director, I let everybody down. And when that happened, the show just fell apart. So that's what happened.
Thank you.
My name is Rhoda Steinberg, and that ties right into my question, which is for the entire panel. What happens if after you've assembled the cast and all of you people, and you're on the road to Broadway and you realize this isn't going to work, it's going to be a flop? How do you call a stop to the dreams of so many people who are banking on it?
Have you ever been involved in a situation like that?
Yes, many times that. It's a terrible moment, and you don't call an end to it. What you do is you see it through, and you deliver the show.
And then it closes after the first night.
That's correct.
That doesn't help a track record, does it?
No, no. That's why you have to keep on producing.
Mel Silverman, for Mr. Ostrow. Do you have any regular procedure for scouting off-Broadway productions and showcases for possible future productions? And if so, what criteria do you use in deciding whether to pick up something? Have you ever picked up someone else's showcase?
No. I prefer to either originate by shooting an arrow into the air, hoping that it'll fall someplace meaningful with an author, or to encourage the author to show me his work. But I'm not eager to do somebody else's work. That seems to me to be the job of a theater owner or an agent. I love seeing off-Broadway shows for talent and for new writing talent. But I'm not interested in doing anybody else's job. The fun is creating the show.
Thank you.
Mildred Clinton for Mr. Ostrow. As low man on the totem pole, a performer, I can understand how you budget that category and several others. But how can you possibly budget for a very special production as this before you see sketches, before you handle materials? How can you budget the amount of monies needed for these costumes that are so exquisite?
The simple answer, which will sound terribly arrogant, is experience. Having gone through many, many shows, you have a sense of what it should cost. And if you're a careful producer, what it should cost should be the most important determination. Because if you leave it to the people who do not have the responsibility for the money, they will give you the most outlandish prices possible. So you have to set limits based on your experience as to what it should cost, and then make sure that the artist doesn't feel threatened, that the artist has the ability to express himself within that budget.
Thank you.
My name is Murdis Mixon, and I have a question for Mr. Ash. Can you give us some examples of when the simplest kind of advertising, either television or otherwise, works?
Surely. I think a good example was on a show that I did with Mr. Ostrow, Pippin. Stuart had the guts and determination to use television as a means to advertise the theater when most producers at that point were frightened to do that or not willing to commit the money to do it. We did a spot for that, a very simple dance number with Ben Vereen, and said, here's a free minute of Pippin, and let them watch it, and did not put in a lot of copy and where you could get the tickets and what theater, and but just to entice them, and figuring that if they're interested in that, they will then look in the newspaper to find out what they have to find out. And that was certainly a simple concept, and we are now, as we speak, shooting a commercial for this show, which calls on, which again is very simple in concept, but calls on a lot of the same
Jeff,
things.
could I ask about the Pippin commercial, which is, as I said earlier, is sort of legendary. I assume it made a lot of difference, the fact that you had Bob Fosse. Did he work with the commercial?
Sure.
Did he sort of choreograph, and because he had such a strong visual
and he
sense?
was very involved with the directing and the editing of the spot, which he was impeccable with, as is Stuart. And,
I also think that from that time on, television had to be reckoned with as part of advertising for the theaters.
Sure.
So therefore, your budget then increased once more on adjusting to television's prices.
Before that point, there was very much the feeling that people who watch television, and that they didn't go to the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so and soon after Pippin, we did a spot for The Wiz, which brought in an entirely new audience that had not been tapped in the black market.
Can you pick up a show that is not doing well with television, with any kind of advertising? There's a show that Steve is involved in now, and Joe Turner, and you're having a problem. Would television, would advertising pick that up, or do you think that you can only fan a flame if it's there? You can't possibly
I do
build
believe that, yes.
You have
yes,
to have something to
help.
work with.
You can help a show and create some interest and visibility, but it depends on the show. If the show's not good, the word of mouth will quickly catch up to it.
Thank you.
My name is Pearl Levinson, and my question is addressed to the panel. Why were ticket prices increased by approximately 1,250% from 1962 to the present?
I have no answer for that. No idea.
Yeah.
Where are the jumps? There has to
Well,
be some
it's really, as we said earlier, and Steve could probably speak to this, but it's historical, wouldn't you say, Steve? I mean, there have been a series of adjustments and new contracts with unions. There have been huge increases in advertising costs in the New York Times. Television, the introduction of television. It's really no one thing. It's been a series of things which are regrettable. I mean, there's no question about it, and some of which could possibly have been prevented with hindsight.
Well, there are really myriad reasons why the ticket price has jumped the way it has. The fact of the matter is, however, that as long as I've been in the business, the percentage of the gross potential, in other words, needed to break even, has stayed very close to the same number. For a musical, that number is 65%. For a straight play, it's between 55 and 60. And the simple fact is that everything is more expensive than it was in 1962. Certainly, the industry is to blame for certain areas in the labor negotiations and costs, but on the other hand, everybody's got to make a living. The costs as a percentage of gross potential have not changed in any substantial way.
There is one thing I feel is, and you can tell me if I'm not correct about this, that is unfortunate in this shift, because some things were unavoidable. It seems to me, if my memory is correct, that in past years there was more of a gradation, there was more of a scale of prices from top to bottom. In other words, there was more out. The back of the orchestra, for example, used to cost less than the front of the orchestra. And that's one thing we have lost that I think is unfortunate in this shift of costs.
Also, when you were talking about a $9 or $10 ticket, and the balcony was $5 less, that was a substantial price break.
Sure.
When you're talking about a $50 ticket and the balcony is $5 or $7.50 less,
it's not
it's not meaningful.
Yes.
Therefore, we find today that the orchestra seats always sell first. We sell out the orchestra first because there's not enough of a price break to the balcony to encourage people to sit upstairs.
Well, then why don't you make a much more of a...
Some shows have done that. I believe Les Mis still has a $15 or $16 ticket in the top of the balcony of the.
Several shows have
several
had
shows
a $10. I know Hal Prince on some of his shows has cut the last few rows of the orchestra to $10, and those are always the tickets that don't sell, because people don't want to. It's an ego thing, and they want to pay to be up front.
They want to. Everybody. If they're going to the theater, they want to go first class. They want to
That's
go.
right.
They want to sit in the orchestra. They want the best seats. They.
And the balcony's empty.
The theater as an experience is perceived as a very special. It is a very special evening.
It's an event today.
It's an event.
I know a lot of people that would go upstairs to see the theater if the price was reduced substantially. And I think that somewhere you've got to be able to address yourselves to that, because otherwise you're just continuing this myth of the theater being a special place to go to, but only a place for special occasions, and that's not going to keep the theater alive. That's what we're all arguing about.
My name is David Bruin, and I'd like to address a question to Mr. Ostrow and Mr. Goldstein. And would you please discuss how you divide the percentage of ownership and the way you expect as owners or producers to be repaid, and when?
Usually it's through the process of a limited partnership, which is approved by the Security and Exchange Commission. And the limited partner is entitled, in my productions, to 50% of the profits. The day I give away more is the day I'm going to leave the theater. So we split 50-50 after the return of capital. So the capital is returned to the investor first, and then 50-50 profits.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Klein, and I wanted to ask about the TV advertising. Do you aim it at a specific theater goer or to a non-theater goer?
Depends on the time whether you run the spot and what you're trying to do. At first, you project it to all theater goers. You can certainly, with different programming and times, direct a spot to individual groups, but mostly not. There's not that big budgets available and that amount of money, so we try and reach mostly theater goers.
My name is Mary Ballack, and my question is for Mr. Borod. What is the production stage manager's function once a show opens? What do you do after a show is really open?
Well, the most important thing a production stage manager does is keep the show in exactly the same condition, or at least we try to keep it in the same condition that the director left it in. And that means every once in a while taking out some of the improvements that the actors put in, things like that. But that's and also keeping the technical end of the show up, making sure that the lights stay in focus and the sets are clean and ready to go each night, as if it's an opening night each night. That's really what the production stage manager does. Thank you.
Do you take over the role of director in a sense as well when the director is not
well, only, actually the understudies, yes, that's our responsibility as well, to make sure the understudies are directed properly. And in the event of a major replacement, usually the director comes back to do that. Once in a while, it falls to the job of the production stage manager to do it, and the director comes in and just cleans it up at the end.
My name is Roger Hughes, and to anyone on the panel, or the panel collectively, if you had friends in town that want to see Phantom of the Opera, what do you tell them?
Go see M. Butterfly, obviously.
Aside from that.
I don't know that that could be answered by this panel, but this place is go.
But it's worth asking.
Thank you. Could I say a word, Isabel? The best way is to go at curtain time and just ask for one ticket, and usually there is one.
Thank you. My name's Adam Sanderson. I have a question for Jeff and for John and Stuart as well. How do you see the marketing aspect of the show developing in commercial theater? I know Not-for-Profit is doing some more work, but for the two of you who deal mostly with reaching the actual theater-going person, how do you see that marketing side developing? Do you see a need for marketing?
Absolutely, yes, I do.
And is it happening now?
Yes, it is. In the past, it's been done a lot on gut feelings, but finally there is quite a bit of research and things that we can do, and we do with questionnaires and playbills, and just by responses and running spots at certain times, and how the telephone responses are. There's a big need for it, because as I said, the budgets are small compared to Ford and major.
Once more, I have to interrupt you, and I'm terribly sorry, because again, there's much more that we want to hear from you, and there's never enough time. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theater Wing, and these are the seminars on working in the theater that are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City of New York. And today's panel has been on the production of M. Butterfly, a wonderful show, and the producers and all the people that made it happen have been here today to answer the questions and to discuss what goes into the production of a show on Broadway. Thank you very much for coming.
Good to see you.